ahead and call in 252-228-5098. Cody, let's go ahead and jump in tonight's show. And the big news is the Panthers are starting to build their staff. And one of the things that Frank Wright was, there's a story. Actually, let me just bypass to this. Is Joe Person put out a story on The Athletic, and it's kind of like a detailed moment by moment, day by day account of the coaching hire. But really what like how they were doing the interviews, who was doing when, who was doing what. There was a lot of rumors. There was a lot of conjecture behind the scenes. But one of the things that Frank Wright brought to the table was not only experience and an offensive mind, but connections in the NFL that he had been cultivating since he had even been fired from Indianapolis, lists of names that he had been in contact with, and trying to say, like, it's important for him to put together a top staff. And this was really important or resonated with David Tepper, who spoke a lot about it and why they selected him. And Frank Wright mentions, like, we've got to get a great staff together. Frank Wright has had a history of putting together a talented staff. I mean, if you look at it, they're all in the freaking Super Bowl right now. Yeah. And this name right here, Ejiro Evero, tomato.
Evero.
This name,
how do you say it?
Yeah. This name is the hottest name on the block right now. And I got to just say I don't know how many people in the world have been following defensive coordinators, but this name, haven't seen anybody say anything bad about this guy. Not a single person's like, I wish we would have gotten Fangio. In fact, he is a Fangio. He's a young Fangio disciple.
Listen, out of all the defensive coaches that were out on the market, Ejiro Evero, his name was number one amongst them all. In fact, he was even getting head coaching interviews. We had interviewed him for the head coach. There was a bunch of different teams that wanted this guy to potentially be a head coach. He's by far the most coveted defensive coach that was out there on the market. And listen, I know we're going to talk about Steve Wilkes a little bit later, but now you're finally seeing the benefit. Well, I say finally, but I should say already, you're seeing the benefit of the type of people that Frank Reich can bring into the organization, and that his name and his resume and the things that he has done in the NFL, it means a lot. And people feel like the Panthers are building something really, really nice. And Ejiro Evero was one of them. So a few points about Ejiro here. The first year as a defensive coordinator, he coached the Denver defense that ranked top 10 in total defense, despite injuries that were up and down the roster. And he was
despite trading away Bradley Chubb, one of the, a coveted player. And despite this, or in spite of an offense that didn't put any points up, dude. His defense was on the field the whole fucking season. How many excuses were made for Carolina defenses over the last 2-3 years about, like, oh, imagine how good this was if the offense could actually move the ball and score. The Broncos averaged like 10 points a game.
Yeah, their offense was very, very bad. I mean, there's a reason why this dude was the number one amongst most defensive candidates. And it really has a lot of Panther fans, myself included, fucking pumped for Jeremy Chin and J.C. Horn, maybe even a guy like Dante Jackson, because of his pedigree and what he's been able to do with that defense for the Denver Broncos. I wanted to play this clip. This was when he was still with the Broncos, and I wanted to play it, and then I want to talk about what this means for the future of the Panthers defense.
3-4 in our base defense. We'll play a variety of sub packages. There'll be a lot of carryover from what these guys did last year. But at the end of the day, Coach Allen was just talking about the evaluation. You got to start with the evaluation of your players. You got to see who's in your roster. You got to see what they do well. and then the scheme has got to fit your players, and you can't go the other way around with that.
All right, your scheme has to fit your
gosh.
players, but he also
Logic.
mentioned Tony, something that we have been mentioning for a long time, and that a lot of fans have been mentioning for a long time, and that's a 3-4 defense. Do you think this is finally the moment in time where the Panthers finally make that leap to the 3-4, like has been talked about for a long time?
I have no idea. And when I say I have no, I mean, like, it sounds awesome. It sounds awesome if you have the right personnel. Everyone tells us, or whatever it is. But all I know is this is what I know about a 3-4 defense. Historically, it has fucking driven the Panthers offense nuts.
Yes.
Every time the Panthers have played a 3-4 defense, I felt like we just got mollywomped.
And tell me if I'm wrong
when
here.
we play the 3-4 defense, I feel like everybody mollywomps us.
Yeah,
So
but we never even committed to it right with the correct personnel. I feel like we kind of half-assed the 3-4 just because Ron Rivera felt they needed to do something different to save his job.
Tepper potentially influenced him a little heavily.
But I feel like Evero, however you say his name,
just go with it.
He is more of a specialist in this type of regard. And I feel like if the Panthers know that they're going to be a 3-4, they can start building through the draft in this direction. And I think that can kind of mold the way that we do things going forward. But Tony, something else I've noticed about 3-4s, I don't know if you agree or not, I find that the most ferocious pass rushing defenses normally always come from a 3-4 rather than a 4-3. I feel like it's harder to find. How about this? It's harder to find 4-3 defensive ends than it is to find 3-4 outside linebackers.
Look, I think this is a great comment in the chat. The very next one, 3-4 is easy to run on. 3-4 assumes every team is passing. That's how you crack a 3-4 defense. It feels like is to just run at it. I don't know. Cody, I almost wonder this is when I look at these defenses, and again, I'll tell you this is I'm an expert football fan, not a football expert. So I'm not great at telling you exactly what the X's and O's are and I use the eye test. It works pretty well. Sometimes I've watched a lot of football. I don't know if the distinction between 3-4 and 4-3 is as different as it used to be in the past. And what I mean by that is when you got 4 guys with their hand in the dirt versus 4 guys on the line of scrimmage, but 2 of them are standing up, is that really different? You know what I'm saying? If you're putting 4 dudes on the line of scrimmage, whether they are rushing like Hassan Reddick was, and we'll talk about him later in the show, these stand-up rushers, if they're rushing the passer, is it really a 3-4? You know what I'm saying? I mean, I know it technically is because you're putting the nose and the things like this. I do think is that 3-4s are suited for the modern day defensive end. And is that the league, look at Brian Burns. Brian Burns is a little light in the ass if you think about like a type of defensive end, and he's bigger than a Reddick and all these other guys. Like you can't even call some of these guys defensive ends, but that's how you use them.
Well, and when he was coming out in the draft, everybody thought that he was best suited as a 3-4 outside linebacker. In order to fit as a 4-3 defensive end, he's put on a lot of weight. He's put on some muscle. And just tried to have, be that hand in the dirt type of guy. But Tony, that's why I tell you that those players now are more rare to me. Because if you imagine an outside linebacker, think of Hassan Reddick. You could be 6'2", 230 pounds, and be a dynamic 15 sack a year type of outside linebacker. Whereas if you're a defensive end, you're probably around 6'5", 6'6", and you're probably upwards of 265. And I think finding those.
Oh, that's light, bro. That's still light.
Right, even more. But that's my point.
285.
The bigger, more athletic guys are just flat out harder to come by. And I also feel like you're right. And people have mentioned this in the chat. A 3-4 defense, it's not the best at stopping the run. That's kind of been one of the drawbacks of that 3-4 defense. It doesn't have to be bad.
Probably have to have, yeah.
Having bigger men up front is, as a rule of thumb, better for stopping the run.
Sure. I think the other thing is when I think of the 3-4, the historic 3-4 defense, not the new one, maybe, is and why it didn't work, right? Is I think of people like Quentin Coples. Quentin Coples is a North Carolina guy. He's from Kinston, North Carolina, went to Chapel Hill, was a guy that old school Panther fans, not old, but if you going back to 2013, 2014, I forget when he came out, people were hype about him. He went to the Jets in the first round, and he was drafted as that athletic defensive end who could rush the passer and drop back into coverage. I think that those guys are all liabilities at the end of the day in coverage, right? So is that, like, if you run that, you just have to understand that their whole job is to rush the passer. Like they said this is, I saw Hassan Reddick's defensive coordinator say this earlier in the season. He had 17 sacks this year. And he said he probably would have had 25 if I hadn't have dropped him back into coverage so much. Right. And it's hard for me to say is like, how do you use these guys? I just don't want Brian Burns on running backs. I don't want Brian Burns on wide receivers. And that's what you do. That's how you attack those things. So how do you, and I'm hoping, and I trust these guys know how to mix it up in the right way. I think you have to have, again, I think he's right here, is that you don't, and this is the archaic version of football, is where your scheme, you bring in players to fit your scheme. Or maybe not that, maybe I'm not doing that, but you go like, this is how we do it. This is what we're doing. Instead, the whole part of the NFL is everybody is good. I love the saying good on good, right? Is everybody is good. And Frank Wright said that in his press conference. It's good on good. We got to get the most out of our guys. We have to make it about our players and what they do great. So I respect his position, and I trust his wisdom on this. But I just have never seen. First, we just never had success with it. But we've only tried it twice in our history, or 3 times. Totally. One, I think we were like a 3-4, like in the early in our tenure. Then you had that Ron Rivera year where it was just like, we don't know. We can't stop the run for shit.
And it felt rushed. It felt forced. It felt like they didn't really even fully
they changed mid-season, I think, or something.
Well, no, but they did it before the season. But it felt like the players that we had drafted, it's like we didn't really even commit to a full 3-4 defense. Like, we kind of just took the 4-3 players that we had and then tried to fit a square peg in a round hole. We had older players. You don't know how good he was and how familiar the staff was at teaching it. It was teaching it on the fly to a certain degree. And the only other reason, the time I've seen it, is that 3-3-5. I know that's not a 3-4, but like, it's like the college. And then you're just like, oh God, I just haven't seen us had success when you only put 3 men on the front line. Right. But this guy, you're coming from a team, though, who has a history of fucking dominating with that shit. I mean, guess who? Isn't that what the Broncos ran against us in the Super Bowl, where they ate our lunch? They've always been a 3-4 team.
I know.
And that's what I'm saying, right? Listen, I'm excited for an aggressive Panthers defense. I want us to be kicking quarterbacks' ass up and down the field. And I feel like an aggressive type of defense is what the Panthers need. We need to play
what they need is good players.
Yeah, but
that's what they fucking need. Is we don't.
We have the player. Yeah, we do. We have the players to play man coverage. Tony Dunn. I take J.C. Horn over Patrick Surtain any day of the week, and we have the players that are built for man coverage. And in fact, this was some of the drawbacks from Steve Wilks. People felt like Steve Wilks played that off man coverage too much in the vein of a Ron Rivera, and that it was causing too much of a cushion for opposing teams to just dink and dunk their way to a first down and pick when they want to take shots.
I just don't know if we got the defensive front.
Well, we're going to have to build this way. This is going to be a process. We're just now getting in our new head coach. We're just now getting in our new defensive coordinator. We are starting to move in the right direction.
Yeah.
But we need to continue to draft well. And Fitterer, in my opinion, has never been more important to this organization than right now. Now we're about to really see if Scott Fitterer is who we think he is as a general manager, and if he can continue to build this team with the 3-4 defense in mind. Tony, I wanted to turn to our old friend Jordan Rodriguez, who went on the Kyle Bailey show, to give her thoughts on Ejiro Evero.
I know Ejiro well, obviously covered him extensively here in Los Angeles and then kept up with him when he was in Denver. First and foremost, I mean, my goodness, this is an absolutely home run hire for the Carolina Panthers. And what I mean by that is not just Ejiro as a person, as a coach. He's fantastic with players, fantastic with strategy, but it's a really modern hire too. This is the Carolina Panthers looking at the way that defenses are moving and changing and evolving in the NFL and what the dominant strains are going to be here moving forward. And Ejiro Evero is on the front lines of that. So the first thing I thought of when I see, how hotly the Panthers were pursuing Ejiro for quite a while, actually, I thought to myself, wow, this is a team that's modernizing fast in terms of what it wants to do with its scheme and philosophy. And Ejiro, like I said, he's on the front wave of that. Just the way that he can take all of the different systems that he's worked in, but also meld it into this sort of next evolution forward of what this Fangio system is. You saw it happen. He helped install it with Brandon Staley in LA in 2020, and that kind of took over the league by storm. And now he continues to even move it forward, and it's very player first. It's very empowering to the players to play in a system like that. So I'm going to tell you, Kyle, I'm kind of excited to see what this thing looks like in Carolina.
Yeah, this is exciting to hear about. She's not the only one exciting. I think the thing I go back to is his first year as a defensive coordinator. Is that how much this Broncos team defensive success came in the midst of dysfunction on offense. And that is very hard to sustain. I don't care what the talent level you have. You saw him dealing with injuries, trade away, but the team produced, and they're in a league. They're in a division. The only times here, if you look at this is wild. Actually, I'm going to share this just because I pulled this up the other day because I was just learning about him, and I've got to learn more about the Broncos. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's who we should be kind of studying in a way. Yeah. Look at these. Now, I know you guys are going to look at or at least I just remember the Broncos just sucking on offense, right? I do remember that. But look at this. 17 Seahawks, 9 Texans, 10 49ers. They allowed 32 against the Raiders. I mean, now they played some bad teams in the beginning. The Jets, but they hold the Chargers to 19 in October. They held the Jaguars to 17.
What was the score when we played them?
When we played them, 23-10.
And see, even then, this actually mentioned earlier, Tony, this defense was having to kick in overtime to make up for that putrid Denver offense and Russell Wilson stinking up the joint.
They gave up over 30 points, only one, this 51, but I don't think they had anybody play. I don't know what that was. Remember that game where the Rams put up, it was that, that was all, I think that was all the Rams defense. Wasn't that Baker Mayfield involved in the 51-point game? The 50 burger on Christmas Day. I think was but look, you're talking about the only time they gave up over 30 points was to the Chiefs, and they're in the Super Bowl. If you exclude that. So to me, that says a lot. And one of the things that I continue to go back with this hire is that while he is a young and exciting defensive coach, he has 15 years of NFL coaching experience. The other thing that we also brought in right now, one of the hires, we don't know in his official capacity of what he is going to be with the Carolina Panthers, but we brought in Deuce Staley. Deuce Staley was, I think parted ways in a good way with Detroit. The word that I've heard is that his mother is ill, and he's from South Carolina, I believe, or somewhere in the Carolinas. And this would have been a good fit coming back home. I think there might be some correlation with him and Frank Reich at their time in Philadelphia. So, like, there's some potential relationship going back into the well there. But if you look at even just the Staley, the Evero, Campen, Tabor, this is the one thing that I found interesting. The problem facing a guy like a Matt Rule coming from the college ranks is not just a transition from college to the pros and how things are done, but your relationships are all built through the college system. So the guys you can call up, the guys you could call in a pinch and ask for advice, the guys that you ask to bring in your staff or whatever, they're all college dudes. Guess what Frank Reich is not? He is a pro dude through and through and through, and this staff already is showing you this. It's got the pro pedigree. And I don't know if this isn't just us putting a staff together that's good, or if this is a symbol that Frank Reich has just had a long history in the NFL, and he can go to the well. His name, his contacts carry a bravado, or a not bravado. That's not the right word. They command a respect that the college name, and this is like look at this, is that Sean Payton is taking over the Broncos. Supposedly the Broncos wanted to retain Evero, and he said, man, I just really would like a fresh start. And then he comes to Carolina.
Yeah, man.
Supposedly he chose Carolina over the Vikings. He chose Carolina over the Broncos, clearly.
Vikings fans were mad, too.
This has to be somewhat of Frank Reich's, I don't know, the attractiveness of him.
And can I be a little bit controversial right now?
Please.
I know we're going to talk about Steve Wilkes, and I would have pulled for Steve Wilkes, but this is why Frank Reich was the better hire of the two.
I agree.
Between Frank Reich and Steve Wilkes. And we're going to talk about Steve. He's gone on to greener pastures, and he kind of failed up, since he failed to make the playoffs. Now he's gone on to a very good opportunity for him. But it's what you mentioned, Tony. Frank Reich has the type of pedigree where people can already see what he's building over here. They see how good our offensive line was. They see how we have, listen, regardless of what you and I think of the Panthers defense as Panther fans, the thought around the NFL is that the Panthers have a lot of really good young defensive players to build around, and that they're a few pieces away from being a top defense in the NFL. We're not used to it, but the Panthers right now are one of the premier destinations because of Frank Reich and because of what we're doing here in Carolina.
Love it. Love it.